I think most people would like to face death unafraid. But many over the years have said this was impossible, that you can't face death unafraid. Aristotle thought death was to be feared more than anything because it appears to be the end of everything, he said. Zart claimed that death removed all meaning from life. Shakespeare described the afterlife like this in a line from Hamlet: the dread of something after death, the undiscovered country, from whose bourne no traveler returns. Certainly very discouraging, almost depressing outlooks on the end of life. Some of the Bible have expressed similar sentiments, though. Bildad, one of Job's friends, described death as the king of terrors in Job 18, verse 14. On two different occasions, David remarked about the terrors of death. Let's turn to Psalm 55 as our kind of introduction to this lesson. Psalm 55, and notice verses 4 and 5. Psalm 55, verses 4 and 5. David wrote, "My heart is severely pained within me, and the terrors of death have fallen upon me. Fearfulness and trembling have come upon me, and horror has overwhelmed me." There's some of David's sentiments, his emotions, his feelings about death. The terrors of death. And in Psalm 116, we have these words. Psalm 116, verse 3. Psalm 116, verse 3. "The pains of death surrounded me, and the pangs of Sheol lay hold of me. I found trouble and sorrow." At different points in people's lives, they have come to that same conclusion. They call death a terror. They call it horror. They are afraid. They're trembling at the thought of leaving this world. But God the Father doesn't want His people, His children, to be terrified of death in the same way that unbelievers are. In Isaiah chapter 26, we have these comforting words. Isaiah chapter 26 and verse 19. Isaiah 26, verse 19. "Your dead shall live. Together with my dead body they shall arise. Awake and sing, you who dwell in dust, for your dew is like the dew of herbs, and the earth shall cast out the dead." What does he say? He says, your dead shall live, and together with my body they shall arise. As a result, you should awake and sing. God doesn't want His people to have that same terror of death that unbelievers do. And I think that's something that all of us need to understand. The writer of Hebrews gives us some extremely comforting words. In Hebrews chapter 2, verses 14 and 15. The writer says, beginning in verse 14, "Inasmuch then as the children have partaken of flesh and blood, He Himself likewise shared in the same," talking about Christ, "that through death He might destroy him who had the power of death, that is, the devil, and release those who through fear of death were all their lifetime subject to bondage." Now notice what caused those who through fear of death were all their lifetime subject to bondage. It was Christ and His death on Calvary. That released them from that fear. So they never had to have that same bondage to fear ever again. I know this past 10 days have been difficult for me. I remember when I first got that phone call, I really didn't think my dad was going to make it. And neither did he. I talked to him. He didn't think he was going to make it. He thought sure that it was over for him. But believers don't have to have that same terror of death. Well, what causes so many people to fear death then? And I'm sure there's a number of reasons. Some people fear what they don't know or understand. And that's often true. Things that people don't know and they don't understand, they're afraid of. And since none of us has experienced it, we do not know what it will be like. It's one of those things we cannot experience more than once. We can't go by so-called near-death experiences because they're completely unreliable. And when you look at the people in the Bible, especially those in the New Testament, that were raised from the dead, people like Lazarus, what do you note about them? There's no record of what they said about it anywhere. So there's no recordings of those few people who did experience that physical resurrection. None whatsoever. So the unknown is often a very scary thing. It's something that we cannot experience, and so, as is with many things, people are afraid of what they don't know, of what's unknown, what they can't experience. They don't understand it. Other people are afraid of death because they don't want to leave this world. In other words, this is the one they like. They're comfortable in this world, and so they don't want to leave this world. They have no desire to give it up. In Job chapter 2, verse 4, it says, all that a man has, he will give for his life. And that's the way many people are. Whatever I have, I'll give if you'll let me live. That's what was said there in Job 2, verse 4. Whatever I'll give so I can remain living. Many people become so comfortable in this world. They enjoy it. They enjoy the comforts. They enjoy the beauty of it. They enjoy all of the things in this world. So leaving it brings anxiety. Leaving it brings anxiety. A third reason people may fear death, because they have such little control over it. It's not something that can be resisted forever. The writer, of course, of Hebrews, in Hebrews chapter 9, verse 27, says that it's appointed for men to die once. That is our lot in life, is to die. That's the natural end of our life on earth, is death. That's the natural end of it. And so people have a hard time because they can't control it. You know, we like to control things. We like to control what we do and where we go and how we feel. Well, that's something that we cannot control. In some places in the Bible, death is said to be an enemy. Remember, Paul uses that expression in 1 Corinthians chapter 15. He says, the last enemy to be destroyed is death. So there Paul calls it an enemy. And a fourth reason some people fear death is because they believe that the grave is their final destination. In other words, they believe that this life is all there is. Vast numbers of people in our world, in our country, believe that when we die, we die. And that's it. There is nothing else. But in Job chapter 7, we have these words. This would be a great place to mark in your Bible, if maybe you already have this marked. Job chapter 7, beginning in verse 7. Job 7, beginning in verse 7. Oh, remember that my life is a breath. My eye will never again see good. The eye of him who sees me will see me no more. Notice his feelings about death and how he thinks this is it. My eye will never again see good. The eye of him who sees me will see me no more. While your eyes are upon me, I shall no longer be. As the cloud disappears and vanishes away, so he who goes down to the grave does not come up. He shall never return to his house, nor shall his place know him any more. Now, of course, later on, God talks to him. But that's the view of a lot of people. That's the view of a lot of people. They'll not see me anymore. And so they're afraid of death because they believe that this world is all there is. But how should Christians, how should God's people, how should His family face death? I'd like to begin by looking at what Paul wrote about death in Philippians chapter 1. Philippians chapter 1, and notice verse 23. Philippians chapter 1, verse 23 says, "For I'm hard pressed between the two, having a desire to depart and be with Christ, which is far better." I looked up that expression, far better. The English describes it as a superlative. In other words, it's like the greatest way to describe it. It's like saying it's the best. It's far, 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 far better. That's what Paul says death is. He says it's so much better than this world. In every way, it's better. And he uses the word depart. He says, I have a desire to depart. The word means to loose up or to let go. This is where the spirit is released from the body. It's the part of me that lives forever. You might say it's the part of me that's me. It's the part of me that's been me since I came into this world, since I was conceived. My body has changed drastically since I came into this world. But I'm still me. And no one else is. Paul says it's so much better to depart. In 2 Corinthians chapter 5, the same writer, Paul, in talking about this release from the world and this release from life, begins in 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 1, saying, "For we know that if our earthly house, this tent, is destroyed, we have a building from God, a house not made with hands, eternal in the heavens." Eternal. The part of me that's me is eternal. I'll always be me. I'll never be anyone else. That part is eternal. It's a part that's going to live forever. And it's not made with hands. There's nothing physical about that part. We skip down to verse 6. "So we're always confident, knowing that while we're at home in the body, we're absent from the Lord. For we walk by faith, not by sight. We're confident, yes, well pleased, rather to be absent from the body and to be present with the Lord." He says that same thing and emphasizes it again. He says it's so much better to be away from this body, because when I'm absent from the body, I'm present with the Lord. He basically says there's no comparison. For Christians, for believers, for children of God, he says there's none. What else should Christians do? How else should they feel? First of all, or next, we're not going to be alone in our passing. We're not going to be alone in our passing. Remember what Jesus said to the thief on the cross in Luke chapter 23? "Today you will be with me in paradise." Yeah. How comforting. Of course, we often think, and I don't know how many times I've read Psalm 23 at a funeral service or whatever, but it has some great words in it. You know, "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death," what? "I will fear no evil." Why? "Because you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me." And I think we can apply that to death. Not just difficult times in this life, but death itself. So we won't be alone. Death for God's people should be viewed as a transition from this world into the next. Charles Lindbergh wrote, "Death is but a new adventure in existence." It's an exodus from one world into the next. The Apostle Peter wrote in 2 Peter chapter 1, in describing this very thing, beginning in verse 13, he wrote, "Yes, I think it's right, as long as I'm in this tent, to stir you up by reminding you, knowing that shortly I must put off my tent, just as our Lord Jesus Christ showed me. Moreover, I will be careful to ensure that you always have a reminder of these things after my decease, after my exodus, after my departure." He didn't say after my end. He doesn't write about it being an end. After my departure, after my leaving, after my exodus. Yeah, he said, my body's going to stay here, my tent, but me, my soul, my spirit, I'm going to be leaving. I don't come to an end. But it's simply, I'm leaving my body, I'm leaving this physical world. So Peter said, while I can, I'm reminding you of those things. And of course, the rest of the letter, he reminds them of many things. Years ago, I got this. It's called Death, What a Wonderful Way to Explain It. The sick man turned to his doctor as he was preparing to leave the examination room and said, "Doctor, I'm afraid to die. Tell me what lies on the other side." Very quietly, the doctor said, "I don't know." "You don't know? You, a Christian man, do not know what's on the other side?" Well, the doctor was holding the handle of the door. On the other side came a sound of scratching and whining, and as he opened the door, a dog sprang into the room and leaped on him with an eager show of gladness. Turning to the patient, the doctor said, "Did you notice my dog? He's never been in this room before. He didn't know what was inside. He knew nothing except that his master was here, and when the door opened, he sprang in without fear. I know little of what's on the other side of death, but I do know one thing. I know my master is there, and that's enough." That's enough. We need to understand that death is not final. Regardless of what we hear from the news and what we read in places and so forth, death is not final. In John chapter 11, Jesus himself said these words. John chapter 11, verse 25. Jesus said, "I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me, though he may die, he shall live." Though he may die, yeah, he's going to die in this world, but he will live. Earlier, John chapter 5, Jesus had said this, beginning in verse 28. Jesus said, "Do not marvel at this, for the hour is coming in which all who are in the graves will hear his voice and come forth. Those who have done good, to the resurrection of life. And those who have done evil, to the resurrection of condemnation." That's what he said would happen. Death will one day be destroyed. Death is coming to an end itself. In 1 Corinthians chapter 15, that great chapter on the resurrection, Paul wrote this, 1 Corinthians chapter 15, beginning in verse 54 and following. Paul writes, "So when this corruptible has put on incorruption, and this mortal has put on immortality, then shall be brought to pass the saying that's written, Death is swallowed up in victory. O death, where's your sting? O Hades, where is your victory?" One day. The Christian knows that death frees him, frees her from physical pain as well as mental anguish. In Revelation chapter 21, I know you'll recognize this verse. Revelation chapter 21, verse 4, John writes, "And God will wipe away every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death, nor sorrow, nor crying. There shall be no more pain, for the former things have passed away. We're also going to be freed from a world of sin. Everywhere in this world we look, there is sin. There's immorality, there's wickedness, there's injustice, there's oppression, and on and on and on. But John writes later in the book of Revelation, Revelation chapter 22, beginning verse 14, "Blessed are those who do His commandments, that they may have the right to the tree of life, and may enter through the gates into the city. But outside are dogs and sorcerers and sexually immoral and murderers and idolaters and whoever loves and practices a lie." So in heaven, none of those type of people will be there. The ones that we didn't want to be with in this world, like idolaters and immoral people and wicked people, they will not be inside the gates of the city. They will not be there. So death not only frees us from the physical pain, but also frees us from this world of sin. I don't think the Bible tells us that we're going to be completely free from any type of anxiety about death, but we don't need to be terrified of death like unbelievers. We don't need to suffer that same type of terror and horror of death that so many people in the world do. You know, John in the book of Revelation said, "Blessed are the dead who die in the Lord." Because ultimately that's the only thing that matters. It's the only thing that matters if we die in the Lord. Number one, that means we have to be in the Lord. And number two, it means we have to remain faithful in the Lord. And as long as we die in the Lord, all of those wonderful things that John talks about in Revelation 21 and 24 will be ours. So that we don't have to have that dread and terror and horror of death like the world. Yes, the fear of death. Many people in the world are terrified of it. And rightly so for most. Because that way of condemnation waits for them. That lake of fire that burns with brimstone waits for them. But for the faithful, they, like Paul, look forward to being absent from the body and being present with the Lord. This morning may be the morning you need to put yourself on that right track by being immersed for the forgiveness of sins, being baptized into the Lord, into His body. Or maybe you haven't been living faithful and you need to come and ask for prayers. But if you need to come for whatever reason, I encourage you to do that as we stand and sing this song.